You're listening to What It's Like with Luce, a podcast highlighting ordinary people doing extraordinary things. I'm your host Lucy Norris, and on today's episode, I'm chatting with mental health advocate and Sea Change ambassador. From a young age, this week's guest has been experiencing a degree of anxiety. Growing up happy and outgoing, it didn't impact her life until her later teenage years when she dealt with depression and anxiety on a larger scale. Making it through the tough times made her realize just how much of a stigma there was around mental health and how much she needed someone to look up to in times of need. Stumbling across an email inquiring for ambassadors, she hit reply and began sharing her story in the hope it would inspire and help others. Countless speaking engagements, a popular social media platform, and podcast later, here's what it's like to be Abigail McDonnell. Welcome, Abigail. Thank you so much for coming on and chatting with me today. How I like to get everything started, if you don't mind, kind of a weird one, but it just gives a bit of context. Can you explain a little bit about what it was like for you growing up or what you remember from that experience?
Yeah, of course. Really interesting question. I like it. So I had a really, really good childhood. And I think this always ties into like when I think about my mental health journey, how good my childhood was and how like nothing really kind of stemmed from it. But I was quite an anxious kid always. So looking back on it now, I'm like, oh, I wasn't just like a sensitive kid. I was actually just anxious. But I was like loud and boisterous. You know, I was in a stage school for like 10 years and dance and drama and all that sort of thing. So I think that's where I get my confidence from in terms of like making my own podcast and public speaking and stuff like that. But I had like a relatively good childhood. I think the one thing that I would take from it looking back, and my parents looking back as well, they're like, oh my God, you were an anxious kid. You weren't actually just sensitive or dramatic. You were like suffering from anxiety. But I had a really good childhood. Like I'm so close with my sister and my parents, and like we have such a tight knit bond. So all good things, all laugh and love and all that sort of good stuff.
I love how you mentioned the stage school there. I was also a stage school kid, so I can relate a lot. So then I suppose against that background, maybe it's surprising for people who know you now about all your advocacy work and the amazing things you do for mental health, that you did yourself struggle with anxiety and depression against that background. So if you don't mind, if you're comfortable, maybe talking me through what that experience was like for you and kind of how it came about.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, I think that was kind of a surprising thing for me as well, because I'd always been like the happy-go-lucky kid and the kind of funny one in my group of friends, like always trying to make people laugh and or just trying to be silly and stuff like that. So when I kind of was first hit with like severe anxiety and severe depression, it was like, oh my God, who is this? I have no idea what's happening and I have no idea who I am right now. And I would say that it did come across, like when I came out and started talking about my mental health journey, I say it did surprise some people because I am so good at putting on a front and so good at acting confident and strong and just laughing all the time and things like that. Like I'm really good at putting on that front. And, you know, like even with the stage school stuff, I did pantomimes for years. So I'd always just be like super happy, like dancing and smiling and all that sort of thing, and never ever like showed a crack in anything like that. So I say it was really surprising for a lot of people because it was so surprising for me as well. And I say for my parents, my family, like it was a big shock for all of us. I think it really hit me when I was just like, I don't know who this is and I don't know why I'm like this, because this is the complete opposite of to who I was. So I think that was really difficult to kind of just take in. And I think that kind of stopped me from getting better for quite a while because I was so searching for the why for so long. I was like, why am I like this? Why is this happening to me? Instead of just kind of taking it in and getting on with it, or not getting on with it, but getting the help I needed. And I think that happens to a lot of people where you're hit with this kind of a mental health difficulty or mental illness, and for so long you're just thinking, why is this happening? So yeah, it was definitely a big shock for me especially.
Yeah, I think your story is really interesting in particular because I feel like well, I suppose it feeds into like the stigma around the whole thing and just like the culture in general around it. But there always has to be some mad, you know, crazy, horrible reason as to why this happened. And it's almost like it's only acceptable for you to be so sad that you can't get out of bed, or to be so anxious that
Yeah.
you're having panic attacks because of this thing. Like you have to have something to blame in order for it to be valid.
Hmm.
So I think it's really incredible, you know, that you stood up and you shared your story to make people aware. Like, no, sometimes these things just happen, and the
Yeah.
quicker you accept it and get the help, the better everything's going to be. So I think that's really amazing from you. And so I suppose moving on from that, can you talk to me about your decision to open up and share online, and what the early days were like?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you. That was really, really sweet, and I appreciate it. Because that's just what I'm trying to do. So, every bit of praise like that really puts it back into me and makes me realize why I'm doing all this. But I guess so. I got through the leaving cert somehow, um, which was mad because I didn't do fifth year exams, or I didn't do anything like that. So I somehow got through secondary school, and then I made it into college. And I remember getting an email from an organization called Please Talk, which are now, I think they're now disbanded, but they were kind of a sister company of Sea Change, or a sister kind of organization. Um, and they were looking for ambassadors for mental health. And I never heard of anything like this before. Like I know it's kind of all over the place at the minute, but at the time I was like, wow, this is so new and like so different. And I really just thought to myself, why don't I turn something that was so negative and so kind of traumatic and like a horrible part of my life, like why don't I turn this situation into something good, and to be able to look back at it and say, okay, well, it didn't happen in vain, I guess, where I didn't kind of, I learned so much from it, and I brought so much from it. So I remember replying to the email just being like, yeah, I'd like to know more. And then I was accepted as an ambassador, which was amazing. So for people who don't know, Sea Change is the national stigma reduction agency. So that's like a huge part of my kind of whole ethos when we're talking about mental health, is like breaking the stigma, and to normalize it. So the thing with being a Sea Change ambassador, your role is to share your story, and it's as simple as that, and you can share it in any way you want to. So I remember kind of thinking like, okay, I want to write something, like I want to write all this out and just lay it out all out on the table. So I wrote kind of a blog post, and I titled it Stigmatized. And I went through everything. Like I went through how I was like diagnosed, and what I was feeling, and how I'm doing now and all that sort of thing. And I remember sharing it on Facebook, and because Facebook was like the thing at the time.
Yeah.
And I got such like huge feedback and huge praise, and just thanks for saying it. So it was amazing, and I knew right from that moment that this was like the right thing to do. Because I had people messaging me who I'd never, or rarely talked to, or would rarely think of having a mental health difficulty or a mental illness, or even struggling at any point. I had them coming to me and saying, thank you so much for speaking out on this. Like these are the things I've wanted to say, or that I can relate to this. And it kind of goes back to me thinking, gosh, if I had someone when I was going through probably the worst part of my mental illness, if I was able to read something that I could relate to, or look up to someone that was going through something similar to me, it would have made a world of difference. So getting messages from people saying thank you so much, and I don't have the strength to do this right now, but I'm living it through you, or like you're bringing me hope, and it's just amazing. It's really, really lovely. And I've always kind of said, and it's the most cliche thing ever, but if I can help one person, and I think even if you're working towards that goal, you're doing something good. So yeah, it's since then I've just been talking about mental health nonstop, literally, to whoever will listen. In terms of podcasts or interviews, or writing and Instagram and stuff like that. So it's brought a whole new world of opportunity to me. Like I would never change anything, and I absolutely love being an advocate and bringing kind of some good to the world and helping to break the stigma, because I've been through it, and I've had stigma against myself, and I've had self stigma from my own mind, so it's gone off in tangents there, but it's been
No,
amazing
it's
to kind of open up and talk about it.
yeah, no, it's so cool to hear. And you actually just reminded me of a quote I think I have on one of my Pinterest boards. I know it's so cliche, but it's like, be the person you needed, or be the person your younger self needed. And I feel like that's exactly what you've transformed your
Yeah,
life into, which is so inspiring for people to watch. um but the only
thank you.
thing I kind of like that struck me, I suppose, or that I would be curious about with in terms of like digital mental health advocacy, from someone that has suffered with anxiety before in the past, or I mean, I don't know if it ever goes away, but did you ever worry that opening up, sharing your story with the world, having this permanent place on the internet where people can know what you're going through would regress your
Hmm.
progression? That's definitely not the way to say that, but like, bring it back for you
No,
and
yeah, I understand. Yeah.
flare up your mental health.
I think the only thing I've kind of worried about with kind of social media, I've actually never thought about that before. I guess that's a good thing that I know my boundaries. Um, like I remember, I think social media would have been worse for me when I was really, really ill, probably in like fifth year. And I don't know if you remember the app called We Heart It, and it was kind of like Pinterest, and there was all kind of grungy, angsty, like horrible posts, and you'd be like, yeah, like I agree with this, and like just stuff that would kind of make you feel sad, like a post that makes you feel sad.
Yeah.
It was all stuff like that, and I remember like really getting into that, and like the Tumblr posts and all that sort of thing, like where it made kind of mental illness look like an aesthetic sort of thing,
Yeah.
um and I think that's the only stage where that would really actually make me worse. I think I have a really good relationship with social media right now. I know when to log off, I know when to set my boundaries. And I think the only thing about opening up about my mental illness and stuff like that is a part of me is still like, oh God, people just think of me as that. So they would tie my name to my mental illness, or they would think, air quotes here, they think I'm crazy or unstable and all that sort of thing. And often the kind of societal side of me is like, oh my God, a boy is never going to want to like go out with me again after seeing this, because they think I'm mad or crazy or a psycho, all air quotes here. um so that's like the only thing that I'm ever kind of like still fighting against, and it's still that like societal kind of pressure in my mind that's like, you have to kind of look perfect and be perfect and have this kind of perfect facade that doesn't show any cracks or vulnerability. So I think the biggest thing about putting yourself on social media is being comfortable with that vulnerability and kind of being proud about it, I guess. So I think it's really important to understand when to log off and who to follow, and if someone's making you feel bad, unfollow them. um but it's taken me a while to do that. Like I remember being a teen looking through Tumblr and looking through all the posts and like just regressing because I was liking all these um like just negative posts and stuff that would purposely make you feel bad. But I think Tumblr and stuff like that were like that back then. Like
Yeah.
they'd have all the pictures of F from Skins being like, oh, it's an aesthetic and all this sort of thing. And I don't know, it's silly right now when you think about it. You're like, why we're doing that? But I was a kid as well, so yeah, no, it's difficult, but I think just being comfortable with the vulnerability like gives you great power and strength and confidence. So that's kind of how I've been able to get through it, I guess.
Yeah, that's amazing to hear. And it's kind of, I don't know, just struck a thought in me as well, you speaking about, say, like how being sad or being depressed or struggling mentally was transformed into an aesthetic on Tumblr. I know exactly what you're talking about, especially with skins and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
I'd be curious to know then your take, because sometimes thinking from like a teenager's perspective, TikTok as an app can be very, it's a trend to fake cry that you're, super sad to some
Yeah.
song or something. Like there's some kind of, I guess it makes me feel old saying it, but looking at it and thinking, God, if kids as young as 13 are watching all of that, I know there's a lot of like eating disorder kind of promotion on there, which is crazy, and
Hmm.
all, like a lot of weird things going on there. So what's your take as from your position now on that app, and how do you think that's going to evolve in the future?
I think it's so dangerous. And especially you bring up the eating disorder thing there. It's like videos of how I lost 3 stone in 2 months or whatever, and like girls standing in, sucking in their stomach and being like, how I did this. And it's terrifying. Um, because a lot of these TikTokers have success now, and young kids want to be successful on TikTok to make it because that's the latest online career. Um, and it's really dangerous. And I can definitely see myself being sucked into that if I was at that age. 100%. Like, how couldn't you? Everyone's on it. Every young kid is on it. Every time I'm walking into the park, there's kids making TikToks, and doing TikTok dances. Like, it's their life right now, literally. And I can understand it because we were like that with Facebook and, Tumblr, and like even like Instagram at the beginning. It can easily go really, really toxic. But I think it's all about who you follow and what you take in as content. I would never come across that sort of content because the things that I like are like dogs, or I don't know, like old people dancing, like wholesome things like that. But for young people, it's terrifying. It's really, really terrifying. And I wouldn't be surprised if some horrible trend comes out of all this that brings harm to those young people, because we've seen it before with Facebook and Twitter, and when we had Ask FM, like all the anonymity. It's really, really scary. And it's hard to regulate as well, because like you can see all the kind of in the US right now, they're only starting to regulate kind of Trump and stuff like that. But with TikTok, that will take years to even do that. So it's definitely very, very scary. And I think for any kind of parents or anything listening out there, it's giving your child that power to decide who they want to follow, and all that sort of thing, and kind of self-regulate, but introducing to them what it feels like when something doesn't sit right with them, because I know so many kids watching it will probably be like, oh, this doesn't really sit right with me, but they can't acknowledge that feeling or recognize it because they're at such a young age, like they're not fully developed yet. So it's recognizing when something doesn't sit right with you and saying, gosh, this isn't right and I don't feel good because of this. Even if it's a trend, or even if it's a huge kind of new thing on TikTok. But it's definitely scary for sure. It really, really scares me.
Yeah, like sometimes I don't know. I don't really use TikToks, but like if I'm bored, I'll scroll. And some of the stuff I've
Yeah,
seen, because I know I have cousins that are like 12 and things, and I know they're on it because they always talk to me about it when I go over. And I'm like, oh, if you're seeing this, I'm so happy that we
yeah.
didn't grow up with hectic social media, because I don't know where I'd be if I had to look at all of that. Um, but obviously you do a lot of work as a mental health advocate. So I'd be curious to know, as well as I'm sure it's such a rewarding, fulfilling career, there has to be some pressure with that, though, to always be this, beacon of hope for people, or be
hmm
there for them to lean on and things. So how is that for you, and what is the pressure like being an advocate?
I think there's a lot of pressure, and I think the majority of it comes from yourself. Um, I mean, it's all about boundaries. There's that you need to know your boundaries and stuff like that. Um, because you're so passionate about something, it can be super hard to say no to an event or talking or like anything like that. Um, so one thing that I've had to learn over the past few years is just to say no to things if I don't have time for them, and it's a huge difference. And saying no without an excuse, I feel like as Irish people, we're like, no, I'm sorry because I have to do this and I have to do that, like for it to be valid. Like you can just say no, sorry, I can't, and that be okay. So that's been a huge thing that I've had to kind of train myself to do, and let myself know that's okay, that I don't have to be run off my feet the whole time to kind of be successful. Because I think that's a huge thing in our society as well, that you have to be on the go all the time, on the grind, always making moves, being super productive to even be successful. So that's kind of something I've had to retrain my mind as well. But then I guess, yeah, there is kind of I guess internal pressure. It would never be external, but I'm lucky enough to have been very open, even with myself, and even posting on Instagram saying like I'm not having a good day. Like I very much openly post about when I'm not doing good, um because I want people to know that even though like I'm probably in a better place than maybe 5 years ago. I still have really, really bad days, and really bad episodes. So it's putting that out there and letting people know that I'm not like a recovered person, and I kind of try to stay away from that like recovered sort of thing, because I will most likely have depression and anxiety for the rest of my life in some shape or form, in small episodes or big episodes, or small blips, you know. Um, so I think it's important for people to know that just because I speak so openly and confidently about my experience, I'm still struggling, you know, and I'm still learning, and learning about my growth and about my mind and how I work and how I function. So it's kind of, again, it's back to that vulnerability of just letting yourself be and letting the world know if that's how you need to cope, to say I'm not feeling good. um and I think that then kind of takes the pressure off a little bit, but the main thing would be to kind of say no. Because I remember so many opportunities have come up, and I'd be like, oh my god, I just love this, I love advocating so much, and I love talking about my journey, and I'll just say yes, and you burn out, you know. So it's important to say no and feel kind of unapologetic about it, because it's such a passion project, but it's a learning curve for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I can imagine it. So, well, it made me laugh, that point you made about how, as Irish people, we're always like, no, because I need to take my brother to the dentist or something. Like, you always have to have a reason
Yeah.
instead of just being like, you know what, I don't want to do it today. So yeah, that made me laugh. But
Yeah.
I think that it must be, you know, as much as it's so great to do all of these speaking engagements and things like that, it must be quite emotionally draining to, you know, go back over your story and rehash all those emotions that you were feeling in order to
Hmm.
help others relate. So yeah, like, I think just fair dues and props to you. But
Thank you.
um, do you think that there ever will be a time when the stigma has been completely eradicated? Do you think that's possible?
I think there's always going to be stigma in the world, no matter what we're talking about. I mean, at the moment, we're seeing stigma around people with COVID, or stigma around people who are staying in and not seeing anyone, or stigma who people who are going out and doing all that sort of thing. So I think, yes, there definitely can be a time where we can talk about it super openly, because we're the generation that have started talking about it, you know. Um, the more we grow up, the generations below us are hopefully going to be the same as us. But I feel like it's quite sad, but I feel like society will always find a way to kind of put stigma on someone else. Um, but hopefully it won't be in terms of mental health. I think we're really, really getting there, and there really is hope for it. I think there will be a stage where we can talk really openly. I mean, I do, when we talk about stigma, I'm like talking about my experience so openly to everyone. And even now, like, I still have people kind of feeling uncomfortable or looking uncomfortable, or if I bring up something, they're like, oh, okay, like they don't know how to respond. So I definitely think that we can get to a stage where people can openly talk about it. I mean, I know, I in my old job, I remember asking someone where they were from. They were like, oh, I'm from Lucan. And I was like, oh, I used to go to therapy in Lucan. And they were like, oh, okay, cool, like, whatever. I was like, oh my god, it's like saying I go to the doctor in Lucan. Like, it's not a big deal. um but I really think that we can get to a place, because you're seeing the changes every day. I mean, how many people right now on the internet talk openly about their mental health? So many. There's so many, thousands and thousands. Like, when I started, probably, when did I start? Like 4 years ago, there was no one. There was absolutely no one talking about their mental health, and I was like, oh my god, I'm literally the only person doing this. This is terrifying. But since then, so many other people have come out. Not just not just because of me, obviously, but because the shift in culture, you know, and people are proud of their vulnerability, and they're proud of their struggles. Um, so I think if we're going to keep going the way we're already going, there would definitely be a huge, huge shift and a huge eradication of stigma. And I really, really hope that we can get to a stage where the stigma breaks so much that the government and the people in power will see, okay, it's so normal now. We need the services and we need the money and we need to put things in place, because breaking down stigma can only do so much. I mean, it's great normalizing the conversation and saying, I need to go get help. But when there's no help there in terms of services and things like that, that's another thing.
I suppose just getting your opinion on how, you know, you're coping with everything at the moment, or like changes that you made in your lifestyle to allow you to be able to you know, function with your daily habits, as all of us
Mhm.
have to do in times like these. Lockdown, I don't even want to talk about it because it's just, I can't believe
I
it's still
know.
here. But little habits that maybe you've picked up along the years that other people who are struggling can implement into their daily routine when they're just really, you know, at a loose end.
Yeah. I think the big thing for me was going into lockdown. So I was like working, I just started a new job. I was in college. So I was doing 20 hours of a new job. I was in my final year of college. And then I was like volunteering in 3 different places and, you know, just all over the place and doing so much and filling my day from like 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., you know. Um, and when lockdown started, I had to like get rid of all of that apart from work and college. So all my kind of normal distractions, or I guess my coping mechanism at that time, was to be super busy. So looking back at now, that wasn't a healthy thing to do because I mean, you burn out. So when I got into lockdown and having to kind of be by myself and like just sit and take in the moment was really hard. Like learning to slow down is not as easy as it sounds. Like I remember just like finishing work or finishing college work and like just sitting on the couch being like, what do I do now? This is so weird. I have so much time. I don't understand it. And there were so many people online. Like I remember the very first lockdown, there were so many people online being like, 5K runs, let's do it, let's learn a new language, let's bake, let's do this, let's do that. And I was like, I can't do any of this right now. I'm physically like wrecked, just wrecked from doing so much the past few months beforehand, and my body has like given up. And mentally, I'm so friggin' nervous because of we're in a pandemic, you know. For the first few weeks of lockdown, I was in tears because I was so anxious about it all. So giving myself a break was like the hardest thing I've ever had to learn this year. The past year has just been me learning to listen to my body and kind of knowing when it needs to rest and knowing when I can do things. And it's such a small, simple thing, but it makes a huge difference. And getting rid of that guilt that happens when you rest is huge.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting thing that you've brought up, because I feel like, especially, you know, in that generation of your between your 20s and your 30s and stuff, there's so much pressure to just create
Hmm.
this dream life for yourself. And I
Yeah.
I hate the online, you know, hustle culture and all of that. I think it's so damaging. And exactly what you said, like the
Yeah.
hardest thing is to just, well, for me this year anyway, it was to be alone with my thoughts. I learned how to do that because exactly as
Hmm.
you said, if something bad happens or whatever, the default from everyone is just focus on your work, exercise, do something like that. Like, don't
Yeah.
sit and just kind of mull over it, when really sometimes that's what you need to do. But that
Yeah.
terrified me for the longest time. I was like, I don't want to know what's going on
Hmm.
in my head. I can't listen to it. Like, it's too much. So yeah, no, I really like that you brought that up because it's such an important thing for people to do. And it's actually so, it's, as you said, sounds so simple, but is one of the hardest things you'll ever learn to do in your life.
Yeah.
um, so yeah, I suppose from your side, now we're into 2021, you've obviously got a lot going on already just with your job and then your podcast as well, and all of your online work and being there for everyone that needs you. Like, you're a busy girl. um, so what does the near future look for you, and what would you hope to achieve within maybe the next few years?
Wow, I mean, it's a lot. But I think I would love, and this is kind of something I'm working on at the moment, is to just go and speak to more people in kind of a more, I don't know, organized sense in terms of doing workshops and talks. I mean, I'm doing a workshop with a company in a few weeks, and it's just so exciting to see companies care about their employees' well-being and care about that sort of thing. So um, hopefully I'll be doing a lot more things like that. And I would just love, like, my dream is to be just a public speaker, like just go around and to schools and companies and people and just talk about my journey, about stigma and about mental health, because I've learned that so many people can relate to someone else talking about their story. It hits so many people, and I would love to be able to do that. But the next year, I'm going to be doing my podcast with Sea Change, and that's out every week, which is really, really amazing. It's so lovely to collaborate with such an organization that has helped me grow in so many different ways. So yeah, I would love to do things like that. Anything that I can spread my story to more and more people and help more people is always the goal. And being somewhat content and stable while I'm doing so, you know. It's never about kind of, oh, I'm gonna, in the next 5 years I'll have my mortgage saved or I'll have a new car and all that sort of thing. It's literally, if I'm happy and content and stable in myself, that's like the most important thing to me.
Yeah, I love that. And I think a TED talk from you would be amazing. So hopefully we get that
Oh,
soon.
the dream. Yeah, that's the dream. That is the dream.
That would be so cool. So I have one more question for you, and then I'm gonna let you go and have your lunch because I know I've taken you up a lot of your time. Um,
No worries.
if you could put your 10-year-old self sat down in front of you today, having been through the massive journey that you've been through and everything else, what's the biggest piece of advice you'd give that 10-year-old self moving forward?
Wow. Okay, that's deep. I think it's one of the things my mom said to me when I was going through a really tough time when I was on Erasmus a couple of years ago. I remember sitting in class and thinking, I'm not going to be able to get through the next 2 hours. And I remember texting her about this, and she was like, okay, can you get through the next 60 seconds? I was like, yeah, of course I can get through the next 60 seconds. That's easy. She's like, okay, can you get through the next 60 seconds after that? I'm like, okay, yeah, I can take things at 60 seconds at a time. And I think taking things as slow as you need to is huge. And you don't need to rush through life. You know, you want to go far, you don't want to go fast, sort of thing. And I would say to that 10-year-old, like, there is going to be really, really, really tough times in your life, but the good times are going to be 1,000% better than the tough times, you know. And like, life is so good and you love it, and like having that drive for life is amazing. But I'll always just stick around for that next 60 seconds. You never know what's going to happen, and just keep doing it by 60 seconds. And that can make a huge difference in terms of your perspective and growth. And just hang on in there, stay in there for the next 60 seconds.
I love that. I think that's such a powerful piece of advice. And it's just, I ask that question to everyone, but I love when I get pieces that, they really click with you and you're like, oh, wow, I'm going to use that the next time something is going on. So I just want to take this time to thank you so much for giving up your time and for sharing your story.
No problem.
It's so inspiring to listen to you. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
You're so sweet. Thank you so much. No, I've loved it. I really, really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for listening, and as always, please rate, share and leave a comment if you like what you hear, and don't forget to follow @WhatIt'sLikePod on Instagram and Facebook. To find out more about Abigail and to listen to her podcast, visit the links provided in the show notes. I'll be back on Thursday with more inspiring stories, but for now this has been What It's Like with Luce.